sitting? Is it the trees moving that makes the wind blow? Well, the philosopher Thomas Aquinas would have the following to say about it.
Yeah, bro, we're live again. Hi, this is Nino with the Boise Hive podcast. I am joined in the studio with my graphic designer, engineer, co-executive producer, Alex Gamble. Say hi, Alex.
Hi.
All right, and I also have the pleasure of also being joined in the studio with a little bit of a local celeb. I have Dale Hiscock from Endless Atlas. Say hi, Dale.
Hey, how's it going?
All right, cool. So happy to be here. Let's go ahead and talk about the Boise Hive mission, which is to prevent suicide and increase mental health within the local music community. And we have a number of different programs that happen here throughout the week. Tuesday, we have Life Recovery, 12 to 1:30. Wednesday, we have Sober Curious, 6 to 7:30. The last Wednesday of every month, we have Open Mic, 6 to 8. The last Thursday of every month, we have Hip Hop, 6 to 10. Fridays, Vets Jam It Out, 6 to 9. And on Saturdays, or it's the second and fourth Saturday of every month, we have GI Jam from 1 to 5. Again, I always highlight our Saturday events. Every Saturday night, we have a Live at the Hive. It's the best thing for your band to do. Great showcase. You get a rad live video. They post it on the internet forever. A great thing that you can point people at. Good way to promote your current set that you have. Can't say enough good things about the Live at the Hive. Would you agree, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have a demo yet, and you don't, if you're new enough to making music that you're not like ready to go in and record specifically, this is a great like backdoor way to do it.
Absolutely. And the production here for being the Hive and not necessarily being one of like the premier venues in town. I mean, the sound quality here is great. The lighting is great. Dale, you've been here before. What do you think about the Live at the Hives, on Saturdays?
Yeah, it's great. And like you said, you've got some good gear and you guys know how to run it. Sounds good, looks good. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's super underrated. Love everything that we're doing on Saturdays. So yeah, if you are interested, that is kind of what we have going on our schedule. So let's get into it. Today we have our first band feature from a rad band called Dozy Dubs. The song is called Heart of Hearts. That you can find Dozy Dubs on Linktree/Dozy Dubs, and that's DOZEYDUBS. And again, that's DOZEYDUBS. Again, this song is called Heart of Hearts. Let's check it out.
Deep inside my heart of hearts, I know what's really going on. You say you're tired of that same old road, but you're stuck inside to move on. Son, I've been there a time or two before, and I swear that ticket's better what's in store.
All right, once again, that feature is from Dozy Dubs. Check them out on linktree.com/Dozy Dubs. All
Those
right,
guys are so cool.
so cool. Such a good vibe. Their Instagram is hilarious. He's always doing something sexy on there.
And dude, they play shows everywhere.
Yeah, they're always playing here, there, everywhere. They're out of town. They're in town. Very active band. Loved me some Dozy Dubs. So we're in the studio today with, again, Dale Hiscock from Endless Atlas. He is a local producer, engineer, and musician. And we thought it'd be fun to get him in the studio with Alex and myself and talk today about, maybe something outside the box, do a little mixing 101, talking about some tricks and some tips that every producer could benefit from. And I think this is going to be interesting because Alex and Dale, and even I to some degree, have some experience together in recording and producing and stuff like this. So, but let's find out a little bit about Dale. Dale, where are you from? Are you from here in Boise?
No, I've lived in Boise for about 10 years, but I grew up not too far away in Bozeman, Montana.
Awesome. I had family out there for a while in kind of I think it's called Flathead Lake area.
Yep.
Yeah, and Kalispell area.
Yeah. It's really pretty up there.
Yeah, really cool. And how long have you been playing music?
Oh shoot, man. I'm gonna sound real old here, but like 30 something years, I guess. Maybe like pushing that. I mean, if you count, taking like piano
Sure.
lessons as a kid and stuff like that.
And is that what you started off piano?
I guess technically I started on a recorder in like fourth grade. When you
Oh,
get you
sure.
get that, you learn hot cross buns. But
Yeah.
yeah, I took piano lessons not long after that. And then I picked up the guitar in high school, which is really, when I started getting into it, got into punk rock for a bit, and then just grew from there.
Awesome, awesome. So let's talk a little bit about Endless Atlas. When did you start this project? Because I've been to a couple of shows. I think I saw you for the first time Treefort a couple years ago. Fell in love with the project. Tried to get out and see you as much as possible. But when did all this start?
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, I guess it probably started like 5 or 6 years ago. After I'd been in Boise for a while and kind of gotten the lay of the land for the scene. It started out as just a recording project because like I played in bands for years, and I mentioned I started on punk rock, but it's way far away from that. It's more kind of like indie electronic with some ambient influences these days. But yeah, so it started as a recording project, and then after doing the first album, I was like, oh, I need to figure out a way to gig this. So I started doing the live looping thing. And just have been kind of on that train ever since.
Yeah, and if you guys don't know about the live looping and the stuff that he does live, for only being one person up there with like a guitar or two and a computer, it's pretty mesmerizing, and just a bunch of rad stuff. Now, kind of a good segue. On top of being Endless Atlas, you also do engineering, recording. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe some stuff that you do that people don't know about?
Yeah, sure. So I do mixing and mastering mostly these days in terms of like my, I guess engineering type work. It kind of just grew out of doing it for myself and my own bands. And then like back in the day, I'd record our albums, and then for various bands and other bands in the scene would be like, oh, where'd you get that done? And they'd come to me. So I don't do so much recording anymore, but like I said, mixing and mastering. I've got a home studio where I do all that at. And yeah, I love working with other people's music too. And in my day job, I'm an electrical engineer, so I've got that technical side too. I like engaging my creative side and the technical side, and that mixing and mastering for me is kind of where it all comes together.
Well, you can tell that you're a technical guy. You can definitely tell in some of the videos that you post and stuff like that. Right up my alley. If you guys are new to mixing and mastering and stuff like that, and you want a very watchable, Instagram with very informative. You can check them out on Instagram.com, Endless Atlas. Very cool stuff. Now, I'm going to bring Alex in here too.
Quick correction, there's endlessatlas.music. If you go to Endless Atlas, it's like a big truck.
Thank you so much. Endlessatlas.music. Now, we're going to bring Alex in here too because I want to know a little bit about his story too, because Alex does a lot of the recording here at the Hive and studio too. He's worked with a number of different projects. He currently is working with a number of different projects. He knows the cool stuff. He's discovering bands up here. But let's find out a little bit about him. Alex, how long have you been kind of engineering and doing what you do here?
Well, so like many people, I bought like a Focusrite 2Y2 back in college, and I got like Cubase came with it at the time, and that was kind of the first.
Cubase.
Yeah, that was the first one I played around with a little. It was okay.
I'm gonna sound old here, but I started on Cakewalk, and that wasn't even
Oh,
for.
me too, man.
Yeah, that wasn't even for recording bands. It was just a recording program, but you could like
Nice.
manipulate it. Anyways, continue.
Like the Microsoft Paint of sound.
Absolutely.
But and then so then I had a job in Seattle where I worked at this nightclub, and we would have live music there every once in a while. We had sound guys, and the sound guys weren't like always available, and so there was a couple of like meltdowns that happened where like the sort of co-manager that worked with me would just text me and be like, hey, by the way, we have like a 9-piece band coming. None of the sound guys are available, so and it's like, well. And like, no, I don't know. You're screwed, dude. Sorry.
He's
Just
like, you
letting
ever mic'd a oboe?
Just letting you know. And like, so I had to kind of figure out how to get like the monitors online and all that stuff, and just brute forcing the system into my will. And it was so. Oh my god, it was such a painful moment because like all this band is like mad at me, and I think humiliation is just such a great motivator to learn. It was a very through the fire type of moment. Because then one of the sound guys, a guy named Alejandro da Cruz Prado. He's out in still out there in Seattle. This guy was so brilliant. Like this one of those people that like he's so smart it makes you uncomfortable. And he was a very very good sound engineer and like all that stuff. You know, he made his own music too. But one day I was telling him about how like yeah, it's kind of like getting to be a nightmare sometimes, like having to like learn a bunch of new things about the system every time we have a band. And so he just basically took like a couple of 5-hour sessions where like on days where the club was really slow and showed me everything he knows, like from how to like wrap cables properly to like how everything needs to be EQ'd. He like drilled me on it. Like I would repeat the same processes
It makes
over
sense
and
because
over.
you know that stuff, and it makes sense that that's
He-
how it was taught.
Yeah, he drilled it. Like I had to like set up and tear down like one of those Panasonic DJ sets like 8 times before he was happy. But and he was also like a nice guy. Like he wasn't like being mean about it. But
Well, if you learn that way, when it's all said and done, you know it.
yeah,
You
well,
know,
and then
by just doing it that way.
yeah, and then you know since then I was in a band and I recorded our own demos, and then I recorded that band recorded at London Bridge Studios with Jonathan Plum, the guy who did like Pearl Jam 10 and Soundgarden. I actually got to play through the same Leslie speaker at one point that's on Black Hole Sun, and I just fangirled like nobody else about it.
With the horn and everything.
Yeah, and working with Jonathan Plum was like so unbelievably fun because not only was this just that was somebody who was doing what he does so fluidly, and it was really cool to watch. And he's got such a positive attitude, and I was like, man, like I walked away really thinking like, you know, if this whole band thing doesn't work out, like that would be such a cool road to go down.
And when did you get associated with the Hive?
Well, so that was what was that? That would have been September of 21. And then a couple months after that, I started helping with the live shows, doing live sound. And then for the ever since then, I've spent every week, like, you know, not only doing like live sound, but watching another absolute pro. And I think I've talked about this before, like watching Jason kind of like also help with sound, like doing
Oh,
the
yeah.
broadcast side
Pro's
of it,
pro.
and correcting my EQing in real time sometimes. So like if I did something and he would be like, "Oh no, that's like you got to have some of that treble in the guitar." It sounds
You
like
always know, like when you're at Tonic, that you're at a good session when you learn something.
yeah,
Like when you're like, I feel like every day that I was working with like Jason, he would just say, not even that he was trying to teach me. It was just that his experience comes through, and you're like,
Yeah.
and it's so common sense to him that he has a very easy way of breaking things down.
yeah.
So
and I
it's
think he
like,
gets
oh
really
my
excited.
gosh.
He gets like really excited about talking about it. Like he's
We
such
talked about
a
this
wealth
before.
of
He's
knowledge.
a snare drum stickler. Like if your
Yeah.
snare drum is not in tune and you can't bring that all the way to the forward of the mix and not have it be too like, you know, out of whack, then he doesn't even want to hear it. He stopped me a million times. We're going to do a different track. Well, guess what? You got to retune the snare and stuff like that, which I kind of already knew, but just his level of detail kind of really made me think that like, you know, it's probably more important than like toms and other stuff. Just having that crack of that snare on tune is huge.
Yeah, that's something that I need to get better because sometimes I'll like be recording somebody and I think the snare sounds like pretty as good as it's going to.
Yeah.
And then you know you go to start like mixing it and you're like, wow, this, oh my gosh.
Well, yeah, when you
There's-
start messing with the snare levels, it really starts coming out that thing is
Yeah.
not really on tune. But it's a good segue to get into here. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to go around the table, and I think we'll start with our 3 biggest mixing tips. You know, if you are going to do anything, then on your mixes, these 3 things, and we'll give it to Dale, then we'll give it to Alex, and then I'll give some input too. So Dale, what do you think? If you only did 3 things, and you don't have to name them out, we can take our time on it, but if you did, for you, what are the 3 most essential tips to mixing?
Right. Okay. That's a big question. And I'm going to start with an example that's almost kind of counter.
Sure.
Is don't ever just do something because it's something you think you should always do. Like everything you do in mixing should be based on what you hear and how that relates to what you want to hear. You know, don't be like, oh, I always cut this frequency, or I always boost this frequency, or I always compress every track. You know, you should.
Or I always use this compressor.
Right. You know, you should. You might have some favorites, and you might have some things that crop up repeatedly. It's good to notice those, but you know, you see a lot of people who come to mixing from scratch, and understandably, they want like a bunch of tips and tricks. But like, don't box yourself in. You should always be listening to what you got and reacting to that. You know, actively listening and deciding, well, I would like it to sound more like this, and then you do something. So don't just follow a checklist.
Yep.
So that's number 1.
And I'll comment on that real quick. I was in a session in San Diego one time, and we were kind of getting lost in that, like, oh, we want to have the megaphone sound and all this cool stuff, and we want to crush everything. And then the engineer looked back and was just kind of like, you guys have a pretty good raw sound, and my goal would be to put the least amount of stuff possible, like a little bit of reverb, a little bit of compression, and then let you guys roll with it because you're a three-piece rock band. Like, I don't want to get too crazy, but he was like, for me, the goal is the least amount of stuff possible to get you to where you need to be.
Yeah, and that's good. And that can be case by case. Like if you're a
Sure.
raw rock band, that makes a lot of sense. If you're like more of like a polished pop kind of thing where you really want it to be pristine and clinical, maybe not. But yeah, that makes sense. And like that relates to kind of intentionality, right? Because he
Exactly.
identified like what is your core sound and how are we going to bring that out. So I totally get that.
All right, what else you got?
What else I got? I'd say one pitfall I see beginners fall into a lot is using solo too much. If you listen to something in solo, you get a bunch of detail about it. You hear how it sounds isolated, but you don't hear how it relates to the other tracks in your mix. So it might be good for like maybe like fixing a problem, like if you have like a hiss or a buzz that you really just want to notch out. But you don't want to just like craft your guitar sound in solo and be like, oh, it sounds so massive, and then you bring everything else in and you just have all this mud and all this overlap and clash. It's attractive to new people because it's maybe easier to hear what you're doing, but it's really going against the entire goal, which is to get everything to work together.
No,
So,
absolutely. That's huge too. Another thing on top of that it made me think about is that I saw this video recently to where it was all about identifying mud, and and I never thought to do this, although I do it every once in a while. So just to go through the tracks and mute them. Like you're gonna find that one track in the mix that impacts everything more.
Yeah.
right.
And
Sometimes it's shocking when you find it. Yeah.
and just that little step. Let me just step back and unmute everything and kind of see what's going on. And then, this one's, what is all this bass in this synth for? Why does this synth even have bass? And then you attenuate from there instead of just starting from nowhere. But you're absolutely right. I could see that if you're only like focusing on just the guitar sound, yeah, you might get a rad guitar sound, but that might not be the complementary sound for that specific mix.
For sure. Or you might get your kick sounding like really cool, and then you bring it up and you're like, oh, I can't hear the bass guitar anymore. Well, you wouldn't have been there if you were listening to both at the same time, right?
Absolutely. All right, what else you got?
Let's see.
We'll pull one more out of you.
Yeah, I would say like be bold and commit. And so one thing that I like to do that is like either save your session as something, or in Logic, for example, there's a feature called or session alternatives. So like you can make big changes, and then if you want to, you can go back to an earlier version. And some people will get caught in this endless cycle of tweaking and tweaking and tweaking. And if you just work quickly and kind of organically and intuitively, I feel like you'll get to better results because you're not chasing your own tail. So just like be bold, commit, make some decisions, and then move on. And then if you have a different version saved, if you really need to, you can go back. But that way, like you're always moving it forward and not repeating kind of the same decision loops over and over.
And that's great too, because I think that most DAW has that functionality. I work in Ableton, and it does it automatically through like a backup process, but then you got to go find which session it was that you last. I think by just hearing that, having a different save point, a fail safe to go back to kind of have as a reference would be huge.
It's a good tip. I've been caught in that loop before.
Yeah.
And what I always do is like whenever I end a session, even if I'm not done with the song, I'll bounce it. I'll make like a WAV file or whatever. I'll put it in my Dropbox, so if I'm walking around the next day, I can listen to it in my earbuds, and I'll give it the name. Like it's like maybe mix version 6, and then I have that history. So then like if I really do want to go back and check, I've got all those versions. I can say, well, does 6 sound better than 5? And maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But then it also like gives you the freedom to just like kind of have a, like I said, if you bounce it out, it lets you review it later and you can fix it in your brain. Like I really like that process of listening to the mix away from the DAW. Like you make your decisions there, but then like coming back in a day and just listening to it and like maybe just writing notes, but not in a situation where you can actively tweak it, forces you to just listen and make some choices without getting in the weeds immediately, right?
Yeah, my best friend's huge on that. Like he won't even move forward unless he's listened to it on a boombox, in earbuds, in a car. Like he has like this whole very specific process that I used to think was crazy, but it's his way of being comfortable with moving forward in like the mix process. And that's huge too, listening to it multiple different ways. So Alex, what do you got? I mean, we'll start, we'll get into you, and maybe I won't have to get into all three because I think I'm kind of interjecting on all these anyways, but like, what do you think? What are your big three?
Well, one definitely relates to sort of what Dale was just saying. Listen, like get like progress bounces and listen to those. But more importantly, like go in with a goal. Because if you're anything like me, like it's, music is inextricably linked to your mood and how you feel when you're listening to it. So if you go in with like no goal in mind and you're just like, let's just make this sound good to me today, right now, like you're not going to be achieving a goal that you otherwise might have been able to identify by listening to those like progress sessions. And like, or if like, let's say you send the mix to somebody, like the artist, and they say like, okay, we want to like fix these things. Go in, just do those things first, and then do any other
Absolutely.
little, because that's also just being courteous to like who is ultimately your client.
Yeah.
Because then you're not just being like, okay, so I ignored all of your suggestions, but look at what I did with the kick sound this time. Like, isn't that great? And
It's
then
a more
you're just
collaborative
yeah, then you're just
process.
wasting their time. The other one, one of the ones that really got drilled into me, that I think has saved me a lot, is cut before boosting. Like, if you want to boost your like 500 area, consider cutting everything but the 500 area
Sure.
first. And you don't always. It's like sometimes it's totally appropriate to just boost 500. Sometimes that'll be fine. But like you should always resort to that first, because otherwise you end up with just so much more noise. And noise is bad, believe it or not.
Agreed.
And then,
What else you got?
Gosh, I'm trying to think. I mean, this is more existential and more related to just maybe the recording process, but like, I'm finding that like, when you're working on like a mix or a new recording, especially if it's somebody new that you're working with, like that should be your favorite song for like the next 2 weeks. And I
Agreed.
found usually that is the case. There's been some exceptions, but usually like if I'm like working with somebody and like working on like a new song, that really is like that's all I listen to for like 2 straight weeks sometimes. And it's kind of the same with like the people when you're recording them. Like those are your best friends for the next 4 hours. And if they're like being unpleasant or they're being a-holes about it, then well, your best friends are a-holes for the
Yep.
next 4 hours, and that's your life now.
That's
And,
actually a good tip for
lean into
engineers
it.
too, because the best sessions that I have and most sessions that I've come away with, like achieving the goal you were talking about, is when you had fun with the engineer. Like you leave that process, even if it's only a 3-day session for 5 hours a piece, you leave that 15 hours knowing more about that person you recorded with
Yeah.
than if you would have hung out like in a 15-hour, like, different setting. So I agree with that,
Well, and for the most part, like pretty much everybody that I've worked with is like really, really cool and really
Yeah.
fun to hang out with. And yeah, having fun with them makes a big difference. And it's funny you say like, oh, you get to know that person. Like, yeah, it's kind of like when you're in a band, you sort of accidentally get to know these people
Yeah.
better than probably your wife.
Yeah, especially when they have like a very like emotional presentation and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You see them go through the ups of the recordings, the downs. You see people struggling because not every day does a recording studio or session just happen,
Yeah.
So just being that environment, there's money on the
And-
line. It's stressful. I mean, you're there for them.
Yeah, and speaking of that, what was I gonna say? Shoot, I think I lost it. Whatever.
Well, something that I thought about and that I want to jump in on that. I don't know why I thought about this, but I've been in a ton of sessions before where people don't pay attention to their like initial track. And what I mean by that is that they'll record, cut, oh my God, this sounds amazing. They'll move on and then they'll start mixing and they'll put a bunch of compressors on it, but the guitar just can't get there. It just can't cut through the mix. Or they expect like the mastering process to make their mix like louder or bigger or wider.
Yeah.
It's something that like if you're not addressing that like in the mix more specifically, I don't want to say gain staging because everyone talks about gain staging. I know it's a big thing. I'm trying to
Don't get me started on
I'm
gain
trying to stay high level, but like there's something to be said about caring about your initial waveform because you're only going to be as good as like the track you
There's
laid
nothing
down.
more
That's really
embarrassing
true,
than
yeah.
turning off all your plugins and realizing it sounds better.
Yeah, I've heard it stated as like you should track like you're never gonna mix, and you should mix like there's no master. You should
Absolutely.
just catch it as soon as you can, and like
Yeah.
you can do some pretty amazing stuff with editing and correction these days, but it's gonna sound better if you get it as, just as good as possible upstream, and that can come down to performance. It also comes down to tone sometimes. Like you said, listening to your guitar, making sure it fits with all the other elements. Like you should
yeah.
before you do anything, you just bring the faders up. It should sound pretty good otherwise you should probably go back and fix something.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned the thing about like amp tone, especially because
Yeah.
like I've been a guitar player for years, and I was one of those kids that loved the sound of just way too much low end on the amp. You get that chest beating sound out of your guitar. And it's like, yeah, that's really satisfying, but like it just doesn't record
Oh,
well.
yeah.
And that
Right,
is the
right.
case in so many different things.
And it's funny because like the reason I think people do that is because what you're doing is emulating the sound you hear on records, but a lot of people don't realize that what you're hearing is actually a combination of like the guitar and the bass, right?
Yeah.
So you want it to sound like, oh, I'm playing in my bedroom, and it sounds like Metallica or something as you do that smiley face EQ where you cut out the mids and boost the highs and the lows. But what you're doing,
Yeah.
is trying to kind of make up for the lack of the rest of the band.
just trying
So
to play
you
with
do
the bass
that with
player.
a band, right? Then you actually bring in a bass player, and I mean, you could do what Metallica did and just completely remove the bass, but
Yeah.
that's not probably best practice.
And the snares.
Yeah.
The snare wires, get rid of them.
Well-
And then one other thing
Yeah,
I'll
I was
say
gonna
is
say
like,
that. What do you got?
it's just like one like sort of piece of advice I would give to somebody who's going into recording or mixing. And especially because a lot of the people I work with are like they're younger people. A lot of times it's their first time doing anything like this. When you listen to that recording, that is the worst it's ever going to sound, and it's the worst you're ever going to feel about yourself as a musician. And because
No, I get
like
it.
recording exposes
Yeah.
everything, you know, and like if you're playing jamming with your friends in a garage or something with no sound treatment, yeah, you're not going to pick up on the same amount of detail, and sometimes it's really like devastating. And I just want people to know that that's like a completely normal part of the process.
Oh,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's okay. It's okay to hate your clean DI'd guitar tone.
Right, and I think you should
Totally.
actually lean into that too, because like you said, it is eye-opening and often in like kind of an unpleasant way. But start doing it early and start doing it often. Even if you just like throw your phone down and put it on a voice memo for your practice, just get used to it, because like the more you do that, you're gonna like you're closing that feedback loop. The more often you do it, you're gonna get better quicker, and you're gonna get more comfortable with it. Because another thing that happens a lot with new people is they go into the studio, and then as soon as it's rolling, you get nerves. And before you even hear it, your takes aren't as good. You might be off time just because you're worried so much about it. But if you've been doing that over and over, and it's one of those things like playing live, for example, where if you got to get it through repetition, and you'll calm down. So if you try and get over that hump intentionally, then when it matters, you'll do better.
Yeah.
Something else that I'm thinking about too that we'll close out here with is just that the being open to change in the studio. Me and Alex have talked about this a couple times, is that you don't really know what your songs are going to be. You don't really know what that sound is until you hit the studio. Once that thing is laid down, then you have created that timepiece or whatever it's going to be. But along the lines with be flexible. Go in there knowing that you have a rough draft. You have a good idea of what it's going to be, but maybe not hold yourself to it's going to be intro, verse, chorus, this out. Let's see what happens in the studio with your structure. Let's see what happens with your tone. Maybe let's not finalize let's have a good sense of what it's going to be, but be open to making that last minute adjustment in the studio to make your project better. Because for me, it never really comes out the way that it's in my mind. Now that I've been doing this a long time, it's closer, when I go into it with an idea, because I have, I think, more reference. But just be open to change. Do whatever it takes to make that project better. And if that is turning your bass down on your amplifier a little bit, so be it,
Yeah.
For sure.
All right, so we'll get into some Hive contacts here. This has been a great little shakeup for us here on the show. If you'd like to find out more about the Boise Hive and what we do here, we can be reached at boisehive.org. We got a bunch of cool videos and stuff on YouTube. You can search Boise Hive. Our telephone number is 208-344-4994. And if you are experiencing any type of suicidal thoughts, or if you're in a crisis, please call or text 988. This is Nino from the Boise Hive podcast signing off with Alex and Dale. This has been a great show. Let's go!
All right, and playing us out tonight, we got a feature from Kid Catapult. The song is called Anchored. You can find Kid Catapult on Instagram, just at kid.catapult. Yeah, check it out.
Well, I know who you are. Well, I've seen this too many times before, and I'd like to think we could go far. But too many things anchor us to the floor, and I'd like to go somewhere real obscure, like North like to hold hands. I mean, I like a physical contact, I just never been a fan, and I'm pretty content with where I'm